Hello everyone. In this video, we're going to solve the International Advanced Subsidiary IAL January 2021 Physics Unit 3 paper code WPH13/101. So let's start. Question number 1. A student used the apparatus shown below to investigate the relationship between the acceleration of an object and the resultant force on the object. So the apparatus that the student used to determine the relationship between acceleration and force is here. We can see that he used a bench, and on it there is an air track. On that there is a glider, and the glider is attached to a slotted mass hanger, and they are connected via a string, and there is a pulley present. So next part of the question says, part A, the air track is a long metal tube with holes along its length. Air from a blower enters the tube and escapes through the holes, minimizing friction between the glider and the track. The student realized the slotted masses and the glider accelerated along the track. Describe how he could determine the acceleration of the glider. You may add to the diagram. So we need to just describe an investigation that we would naturally carry out to investigate the acceleration of any moving object. We know the pattern for writing an acceleration question is, first we need to write the instruments that we are going to use, and then we need to write how we are actually going to use that instrument and how that instrument will give us quantities that are related to the desired quantity for our experiment. So let's start. We will first write the equipments that he will use. So here, for finding the acceleration, he need to find the distance between 2 points and the time taken to move from the the distance between the 2 points. So here we will first draw the diagram at 2 points. Let me consider this and this. So these are the 2 points that we will measure the distance from. So let me point this as M1 and this as M2. Now we will go to the writing section. We will write he has to mark 2 points on the air track . He has to mark 2 points on the air track and measure the distance between the 2 points . Using a meter ruler. He needs to start the stopwatch . He needs to start the stopwatch when the glider crosses the first mark . And stop the stopwatch when the glider crosses the second mark . The glider was initially at rest, so the initial velocity would be 0, as we have already seen that it was actually in rest, and then we added the mass onto the slotted mass and then it starts moving. So it indicates that the initial velocity of the glider was 0. So we need to write it down. The glider was initially at rest . at rest. So initial velocity would be 0. Would be 0. Then we can use the equation s is equals to ut plus half at square, and we have to make a the subject of the equation to calculate the value for acceleration. So then we can use the equation s is equals to ut plus half at square and make a the subject of the equation. Well, I do not have much space, so I'm just going to move upward. So after this, the answer is in the upper section of the page. So we are actually using the equation s is equals to ut plus half at square, and we have to make a the subject of this equation. So we are going to write it down and make a the subject of the equation. And calculate the value for acceleration. Value for acceleration. So then we need to repeat the experiment 5 more times to identify any anomalous result, and also to calculate mean, because that would increase the reliability of this investigation. So I'm writing the conclusion in the top that then he should repeat the experiment 5 more times to identify any anomalous result and also to calculate mean to increase reliability. So with this, our part A ends. I hope part A was clear. I will obviously provide the question papers in my Facebook page. So I'm moving to question number 2. Question number B. Question B, here is a graph given that another student completed the investigation. He recorded his results in a table. So there is a table of 3 columns, one of mass, and the other is of force, and the last is of acceleration. He plotted some of the results on the graph. So some of the results are plotted. In part 1, B part 1 says plot the remaining points on and add a line of best fit. So we need to plot the remaining lines onto this graph paper. So let us first find out that what are the lines that we need to draw. So here we can see that up to 0.59 it's drawn. So 0.59. So up to this point, these 3 points are drawn. We need to draw the 0.78, 0.98. So 0.78 is around this. This is 0.78, and at 0.78 the acceleration was 2.4. So 2.4 would be around here. So here would be a cross mark, and another one was 0.98. 0.98 is around here, and at 0.98 the acceleration was 2.8. So 2.8 is around here. And now as we need to draw a line of best fit, we have to connect all the points, and if we connect all the points it will be a slightly curved graph. Or you can just simply do this thing like that, like connect all the points from the middle and it will be a straight line. Like my one doesn't look like a straight line. Let me try it again. Okay, something better than before. It has to be a straight line and it meets the y-axis at certain point. So this is how the graph looks for part B1. In part B2, it says the student concludes that these results do not show that the acceleration of the glider is directly proportional to the force. Comment on the student's prediction. So the student then predicted that after the graph, he predicted that the relationship between acceleration and force are not directly proportional. So we need to conclude that if this comment is clear or correct or not. So we can say that the student is correct because the line for best fit, if you see the graph, it doesn't pass through the origin, and for two quantities to be directly proportional, the line has to pass through the origin, but this graph doesn't pass through the origin. So that means the acceleration of the glider and the resultant force of the glider are not directly proportional. So we can write it down at the base that the line of best fit does not pass through origin so the conclusion is correct. And with this our part B ends. I hope part B was clear. Moving to part C. So in part C it says a teacher explained that for the resultant force to be directly proportional to acceleration, the total mass of the system must be kept constant. Describe how the student could keep the total mass of the system constant during the investigation. So the teacher asked that you need to keep all the mass that you are using in your investigation constant to actually get a relationship between acceleration, a directly relationship between acceleration and force. So let us first move to the diagram, page 1. So we saw that there was a mass hanger, slotted mass hanger, and there was a glider. So what happens in this investigation is that the student uses some masses on the glider and some masses on the slotted mass hanger, and he keeps on adding onto the mass of the slotted mass hanger, and he keeps on removing the masses from the glider. So to keep the entire mass constant for the entire system, he should do this, that the mass he's going to remove from the glider, he should again replace it onto the slotted mass hanger. If for example there is a mass of 5 gram on the glider and he's about to remove it, he should remove it from the glider and then place it on the slotted mass hanger. In that way, the total mass of the system would remain constant, but the mass of the slotted mass would increase and the mass of the glider would decrease, but there will be a relationship, like constant relationship, and that would give us a more accurate investigation result for the relationship between acceleration and force. So let's write out the answer for part C. Here it will be, he can keep the mass of the system constant by placing the same mass onto the slotted mass hanger which was previously removed from the glider. So he can keep the mass of the system constant by placing same mass on the slotted mass hanger which was previously removed from the glider. So with this our question number 1 ends. I hope question number 1 was clear. I'm moving to question number 2. Question number 2 says a student determined the refractive index of a transparent material. The student had a semicircular block of the material as shown. So there we can see that a ray is incident onto the material and it is moving out of the material in a refracted ray is seen. So we need to complete the diagram to show the critical angle. We need to show the critical angle in this diagram. So first we need to draw the angle of incidence in here. So let us first draw the angle of incidence. It will be perpendicular to the refracted angle. So here it will be so this is the normal, and the angle that the incident ray makes with the normal is actually the critical angle. So we need to label it down. This is normal and this is the critical angle. So part A1 is done. Moving to part B, determine the refractive index of the transparent material using measurements from the diagram. Well, we need to use measurements from the diagram, and I cannot use a protector on this PDF. So if you have a hard copy, then you have to measure the value of this angle. The angle that this incident ray makes with the normal line. So we need to find the value for this. You can measure it using a protector, and if you measure it, you get a value of the angle for critical angle is 38 degrees, approximately 38 degrees. And now we have to use the equation. Angle C sine angle C is equals to 1 over n. The question wants you to find the value for refractive index, so we have to make n the subject of it, and it will be 1 over sine angle C. So it will be sine 38 degrees. And if you calculate it, you get a value of 162. So the refractive index for this material is 162. I hope part A2 was clear. I'm moving to the next part. So in part B, it says the student repeated the process for a second semicircular block of a different transparent material. Her measured value for C was 41 plus minus 0.5 degree. Calculate the range of possible values for the refractive index. Now we need to find the range of possible value. So for whenever there is a value given with the range, we need to find both the upper limit and the lower limit. So let us first find the upper limit for the angle C. Upper limit angle C, that will be 41 degree plus the range 0.5. So it will be 41.5 degree, and the lower limit, and it will be 41 minus 0.5. So it will be 40.5. 40.5 degree. Now we need to use again the same equation. Refractive index equals to 1 over sine critical angle. So here it will be n is equals to 1 over sine. If you are using the value for the upper limit, so it will be 141.5, and if you calculate it, you get a value of 1.51, and here it will be 1 over sine 40.5 degree, and it will be 1.54. So the range for refractive index for this second material is 1.51 to 1.4. So we can write it down as 1.51 less than n less than 1.54. And with this our part B ends. I hope part B was clear. Now we are moving to part C. Part C says the student had a rectangular block of transparent material. She made measurements as shown. So there we can see that she measured the value for refractive index and refractive angle and incident angle. Deduce whether this block is made up of the same material or not. So let us first find the value for refractive index of this material. We can see the value for angle I is 64 degree. here, and angle R is 36 degree. So we can easily calculate the value for refractive index, that is sine I over sine R, and that would be sine 64 degrees over sine 34 degrees, and if you calculate it you get a value of 1.53. So this is the refractive index. Let me remind you that in our previous part, part B, the range for refractive index of that material was 1.51 to 1.54. So let me write it down here in top, 1.51 less than n less than 1.54. So this was the refractive index of that material, and we need to find it out if the block, the material from which the block is, this block is made of, is actually the same to that of the semicircular block. So we can see that the refractive index of this block kind of falls within this range for the semicircular block. So we can say that they are actually made from the same material. So we need to conclude our answer, and that is this block is also made from the same material as the refractive index falls within the range of block in B. Block in part B. And with this our part C ends. I hope question number part 2C was clear. I'm moving to part 2D. It says the student used rays of white light. Explain why using monochromatic light would increase the validity of the conclusion made in part C. So we know that monochromatic lights are actually light containing only one wavelength, whereas white light has a mixture of wavelengths. So when a mixture of wavelength actually travels through a glass, the different wavelengths refract at different angles, and that would cause uncertainty in the value of measured for the both angles. And if there is an uncertainty in the measurement for angles, the entire value for the refractive index would be hampered. So that's why a monochromatic light would give a much more reliable and much more accurate value for the angles, and thus the value for the refractive index. So let's write it down. The monochromatic light has a single wavelength, whereas the white light have a range of wavelengths. Single wavelength, whereas have a range of wavelengths. The different wavelengths of white light would refract differently. Refract differently, so it will give uncertain value for angles. Uncertain value for angles. And with this our part 2D ends. I hope it was clear. Moving to part 2E. The photograph shows a spectrometer. This can be used to measure angles when investigating the refraction. Light emerges from the collimator in a narrow parallel beam. A vernier caliper allows the angles to be measured within a resolution of 0.1 degree. So part E, the question of part E is basically in here. Using a spectrometer reduces the uncertainty in the value of the refractive index of the material compared by using a ray of box and a protector. Justify your answer. So here we already read that in spectrometer what happens that we use a beam box to project the lights, and we calculate or measure the angles using a vernier caliper rather than a protector. And the resolution for the vernier caliper was 0.1 degree, whereas we know that the resolution for the protector was actually 1 degree. So the resolution for protector is almost 10 times higher than the resolution of the vernier caliper. And also when the white light actually travels from the air to glass medium, the white light has a very thick diameter, whereas in the beam box it releases light that are very narrow and have a really small diameter. So it indicates that the measurement for angle would be more accurate for beam lights than for ray box. So let's write the answers below. The resolution of the angle measured with protector is 10 degree, which is almost 10 times greater than the resolution of the vernier calipers. The resolution of angle measured with protractor is 1 degree, which is 10 times greater than the resolution of vernier scale. So uncertainty in the angle measurement decreases. Beam from collimator is narrower than the ray box, which increases the accuracy of angle measurement. Then from ray box, which increases the accuracy of angle measurement. And with this our question number 2 ends. I hope question number 2 was clear. Moving to question number 3. Okay, question number 3 says a student took measurements to plot a force extension graph for a rubber band. Describe a method he could use to take the measurements. Your answers should include a diagram. So we need to carry out an investigation that the student would carry out to form a force extension graph. So we know that we need to have different equipments we have to use. So let us first draw the equipments here. I am drawing the equipments using freehand, but you have to draw all the equipments using a meter ruler or scale. So here there will be first a stand, and it has to be have a clamp with which the rubber band is attached using a clip, and the other free end of the rubber band is connected with a slotted mass hanger. So this is the slotted mass hanger, and obviously there will be a meter ruler attached to it. And to make sure that the meter ruler is exactly perpendicular or not, we can use a set square. Okay, so let's now label the diagram. This is set square, this is meter ruler, this is stand and clamp, this is a rubber band, and this is the slotted mass hanger. And now we need to describe that how we would carry out the experiment using these equipments to find the value for force and extension, and then plot a graph of force against extension. So we need to write our answer from here. We need to first find the original length of the rubber band using the meter ruler. So let us first write down the original length of the rubber band is measured using a meter ruler. Of the rubber band is measured using a meter ruler that is placed vertically on ground using set square, using set square. And then we need to start adding the masses onto the slotted mass hanger. So we will write then start adding masses of 5 mg or 5 gram onto the slotted mass hanger. Moving to the next page. Mass hanger. One at a time, and measure the new length. The student can calculate force by using an equation W equals to mg. W is equals to mg, and extension by using the equation new length minus initial length. Initial length. The one safety precautions that he should take is that he should always try to make sure that his feet are not exactly under the masses. So by any chance, if the rubber band breaks, the masses won't fall onto his feet and hurt him. So we should write the precaution that he should make sure that his feet are not directly under the masses as spring might break off, as rubber band might break off. Causing the masses to fall onto his feet. And with this, our question number 3A ends. I hope it was clear. Moving to question number 3B. The student measured the extension as he was loading and unloading the rubber band. The graph shows the results. So this is the graph, and here it says that estimate the energy transfer to the internal energy stored to the rubber band during loading and unloading. So if you zoom in, and you would actually see that there are this kind of squares. My picture quality is not that much great, so you have to use the official paper, and there you can see that there are actually 70 squares under this area. So we are just considering entire squares under these areas. So there are 70 square under these areas, and now if you actually measure it, one area is basically 0.5 and this is 0.025. Sorry, yeah, 0.025. Now one area of the square, we need to calculate the one area of square. So first we will write our answer, that area under one square that would be 0.5 into 0.025, and if you calculate it, you get a value of 0.0125 joules. We know that there were 70 squares under the shaded part that we shaded in this section. So the area under the 70 square, and that would be 70 into 0.0125, and if you calculate it, you get a value of 0.875 joule. So the area or the energy transfer during the loading and unloading is actually 0.875 joules. I hope question number 3B was clear. With this, our question number 3 ends. So we are done with question number 3, and we will now move to question number 4. Question number 4 says a student measured potential difference using an analog meter. So this is the analog meter that the student used, and we need to find the calculate the percentage uncertainty in the measurement of the potential difference. So let us first find the smallest scale, the smallest measurement that this scale can provide. So we are just using the rough word, that is smallest measurement. And if we zoom in the picture, we can see that there is 1 and there is this 0.5. So the smallest measurement is actually 0.5, and the measured value, the value that this analog meter is giving, is 10.5. So we can find it as measured value is 10.5. So to find out the percentage uncertainty, we need to first find out the absolute uncertainty of this device, and we can find the absolute uncertainty by dividing the smallest measurement with 2. So absolute uncertainty is half of the smallest measuring scale. So smallest measurement divided by 2, and that would be 0.5 over 2, and you get a value of 0.25. And now you can find the percentage uncertainty. And that would be the absolute uncertainty divided the measured value into 100%. So let me write down the equation first. Absolute uncertainty over measured value into 100%. Now the value for absolute uncertainty was 0.25 over 10.5 into 100%, and if you calculate it, you get a value of 2.38%. So this is the potential absolute percentage uncertainty for the potential for the voltmeter. So this is the absolute percentage uncertainty for the voltmeter, and with this our 4A ends. Now I am moving to 4B. 4B, it says the student use a digital multimeter. Now discuss the advantages of choosing the digital multimeter to measure the potential difference. So we need to just state the advantages of using the digital multimeter, then the analog voltmeter. So first we can see that there it doesn't have any scales, it has a digital screen. That means you do not read to or calculate to find the value, you can just see and read the value from the screen. So there will be less error on reading, and there will be no parallax error, or the uncertainty will be less because it gives a higher resolution and it gives a value to 2 decimal places, as we can see 0.00. That means it gives a value of up to 2 decimal places. So that is a very high resolution result. So these are the basic advantages that digital multimeter has over the analog voltmeter. So let us write the answers. It has 3 marks, so we are just going to write 3 points. So the first one is a percentage uncertainty will reduce because the digital multimeter measures to a high resolution up to 2 decimal places. The percentage uncertainty will reduce because the digital multimeter measures to a higher resolution up to 2 decimal places and as it has a digital screen, so it will not have any parallax error. So we need to write it down that, and as it has a screen, so it will not have any parallax error. Sorry, I made a mistake in spelling. That's parallax error. And with this, our question number 4 ends. I hope question number 4 was clear. Moving to question number 5. So here question number 5 says, a student investigate how changing the temperature of a copper wire affects the resistance of the wire. He placed a coil of the copper wire into a beaker of hot water as shown. The temperature of the water was measured using a thermometer with a resolution of 1 degree. The resistance of the wire was measured using an ohmmeter with a resolution of 0.001 ohms. So here is the diagram. You can see that there is a water bath, and inside the water bath it has a coil of copper wire that is connected to an resistor, and there is a thermometer measuring the temperature of the water. So here the student recorded corresponding values for the temperature of the water and the resistance of the wire as the water cooled. The results are shown in the table. So there is a table of 2 columns. One is of temperature and the other is of resistance. In part A, it wants us to criticize these results. In order to criticize these results, we first see that the number of decimal places that are used in both the columns and the consistency. Like if the temperature decreased by 5 degrees Celsius or increased by 5 degrees Celsius, if there is a regular pattern throughout the entire column. So let us first find the difference in significant figures for the resistance. We can see that it is 3 significant figures. This is 2, again 3, 3, 2, and again 3. So there is no consistency in the significant figures for the resistance. And again, if we see the temperature section, there we can see that there is a difference of about 7, and then again there is a difference of about 5, 6, 7, and then there is a very big difference of about almost 13. So the difference in temperature with which the temperature is decreasing is not constant or consistent. It doesn't follow any pattern. So again, the results would be more valid if we would take measurements with a consistent pattern. So that's why this is not a very reliable result, because the temperature is not in a consistent pattern and the significant figures of the resistance are also not in consistent patterns. So we can write the answers. There is inconsistent number of decimal places for resistance. Places in inconsistent number of decimal places for resistance, and the intervals in temperature are also inconsistent. And the intervals in temperature are also inconsistent, as there is no pattern, like there is a huge gap, huge jump from 55 degrees Celsius to 38 degrees Celsius. So with this, our question number 5A ends. I hope it was clear. In 5b, we need to plot a graph of resistance on the y-axis against temperature on the x-axis. So it's already written that we need to plot the results for the resistance on the y-axis and the results for the temperature on the x-axis. I have used these graphs, these results, and plotted the graph already here. So the graph would look like something like this. It's a straight line, and this is the end for part B. So I'm directly moving to part C. So if you move to part C, here it says that the relationship between the temperature T and the resistance R of the copper wire is given by the equation R is equals to alpha R naught T plus R naught, and where R naught is the resistance of the wire at 0 degrees Celsius and alpha is the temperature coefficient of the resistance. Determine the value of R naught and alpha. So let us first write it down. The equation was R alpha plus R naught. We can directly say that this is exactly in the form of y is equals to mx plus c. So which means that the y-intercept c would give us the value for the R naught. Now if you go back to your graph, you can see that it approximately becomes close to 0.7271. So just using the graph and the y-intercept value, we can find the value for R naught, and that would be 0.271. And now we can compare the gradient. The gradient would give us a value of alpha into R naught is equals to gradient. So let's find the value for gradient first. The value for gradient would be 0.348 minus 0.282 over 70 minus 10, and if you calculate it, you get a value of 0.0011 ohms. And now you have to make alpha the equation, the subject of this equation, and it would be gradient over R naught, and if you substitute the values in it, it will be gradient was 0.0011 over R naught was 0.271, and again if you calculate it, you get a value of 4.1 into 10 to the power negative 3 degree Celsius to the power negative 1, and here the value was actually this degree Celsius. So with this, our question number C ends. Let me use this to make it much more clear because I didn't have much space, so I have to just question it all in smaller space. So I hope question number C was clear. I'm moving to question number D. Question number D says that explain one modification to this investigation that you would improve the accuracy of the value for R naught and the value for the temperature coefficient. So we can obviously say that we need to take measurements for the resistance at 0 degrees Celsius to calculate the value for R naught more accurately, and again he should measure the temperature at regular intervals to improve the accuracy for the value for gradient. So we can write it down as he should take measurement for resistance at 0 degrees Celsius to accurately measure the value of R naught, and he should measure the temperature at regular intervals to improve the accuracy for the gradient. So with this, our question number 5D ends, and also the entire paper for Physics Unit 3, January 2021. And I hope the entire explanation of this video was clear enough for you all to understand. If you still have any question that you do not understand, please comment it in the comment section. I would really like to answer your comments, and if you want me to solve any other papers, please also write or recommend the papers in the comment section. And all the screenshots of the answers will be posted in our Facebook page, that is Edexcel Easy official paper, and the mark scheme will be added in the description box. Thank you for watching.